Sometimes when we're settling in for a period of meditation, we can bring to mind that simple, sort of basic value of to do no harm. And maybe surprisingly, sometimes when we're hurting in life or when we have spiritual ambition, sometimes our approach to a meditation period can be subtly aggressive. I need this 30 minutes to save me. And we sort of get off on the wrong foot because the underlying fear or the underlying greed, or it could be for some of us underlying doubt, I'm going to do this, but it's probably not going to work, right? Those things sort of set up. It's a way the mind does what it's done before and gets the same results. So as we listen to our bodies and settle into whatever it is for us is a relatively comfortable, upright posture that supports both alertness and relaxation as much as we can. It won't be perfect. And we have this valuing of stillness in the body. And again, it won't be perfect, but it helps to be relatively settled and still in our sitting posture. That sense of really belonging here. Right now, this is where I belong. Sitting, breathing, awareness of the body sitting. And it's like in a kind and gentle way, we're reintroducing ourselves to our life. And there's a subtle but very real pleasure in this. I guess you could call it an integration. The body and the mind, the activities of our life coming together, unifying around this value of being present. And over time, at least, really learning to trust this value of being present. Remembering, it's really a lot about remembering to be aware, remembering to recognize awareness. It isn't so much we do it, that we do mindfulness, but we recognize this capacity of the mind to be aware of how it is now. And this awareness, this wisdom awareness, this mindfulness, it's always kind, right? It's not a judging. If you see the judging, well, that's something being known by awareness. The awareness itself doesn't really have negative qualities, and in a real way, not even positive qualities. It's just what it is. Like a mirror just reflecting what's in front of it. And because it's subtle, it takes real practice to recognize present moment awareness and to keep it in mind, so to develop some continuity. And a lot of what's revealed initially is all of the mind's habits to want to control our experience, to tweak it, to fix it, to make it better. to problem solve. So instead of the emphasis being on the mind doing something, we're interested in simply being aware that there is this activity of the mind and the body being known. And in a sense, resting, trusting that. This is how it is now. And we learn over time not to be afraid of reactivity. So if there's some pain in the body and then there's some reactivity to the pain in the body, that awareness, that wisdom and awareness, it can include both of those things. Oh yeah, throbbing, aching is like this. Not wanting it to be the way it is like this. And with practice, this whole world of neutrality begins to open up, sensations and activities of the mind that we would normally not notice because they're neutral or nondescript or not provocative. So in a very real way, we rediscover, oh, this is what it means to be awake, to be present, to actually be feeling what I'm feeling, sensing what I'm sensing. All the doors and windows wide open. And whenever we notice some resistance or contraction, then the Dharma move is to recognize that resistance or contraction as something being felt, something being known. Almost as if to say with compassion, you belong to whatever shows up internally, externally, mentally, physically, is something being felt or known. And some people find it useful to, not continuously, but periodically to note or name what it is that the mind is knowing. Oh, planning mind is being known. Breathing in is being known. Breathing out is being known. Touching, touching is being felt. Aching, aching is like this. This sort of quiet, gentle technique of using a mental label can help clarify our actual subjective experience, which is something is being known. It really brings the heart into alignment with the way it is. In Buddhism, we say Dhamma or Dharma, the way it is. The way it is, but we mostly miss this Dharma because the mind is superficial. It's not subtle. So we miss this whole world. So let's continue in silence now. Remember to come back to this simple truth that I value, the heart values being present. This integration, all of this activity of body and mind happening here and now, being known, nothing left out. You can always come back to a meditative anchor, like being with the breath or being with the physicality of sitting, those obvious sensations of sitting, or the sounds in the room, as a counterweight for those habits of the mind getting drawn into mental proliferation. And we just do the best we can to deepen this valuing of wisdom and awareness, of being present. Remembering again how simple it can be. We have this value of being present, just means being both alert and relaxed, right in the middle of this activity of the body and the mind as it is. And just explore for the last minute or so this intention to allow experiences to come and go as they will. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, sounds, sensation. We're just experimenting, not being in conflict with anything. So even if a disturbing thought were to arise, yeah, okay, that's how it is sometimes. So in a sense, a more direct exploration of what acceptance might feel like, look like in our actual experience, moment to moment. And can it be okay to be feeling whatever we're feeling, whether it's boredom, pain, or whatever it might be, excitement? Can this be okay? Being alert and relaxed, allowing, not bothering to be in conflict with anything, clearly aware and letting things be. And finally, you might sense this quality of spiritual healing. It's a very real but subtle pleasure. There's a sense of rightness or healing about it, like coming into alignment with a deeper truth, for example, but not in some conceptual sense or in a felt sense way. And we take our time, we can continue this valuing of being present as we stretch and move our bodies, whatever you need to do. Really good to see people today. Appreciate those of you showing up online and those here in the room. So some of you know before I was away last week teaching at IMS, Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts, place where Shelley and I teach from time to time. And so grateful for Stacy McClendon teaching last Sunday. I'm hoping that some of you were here for that. One of our regular teachers, Stacy and I take turns doing that monthly loving kindness practice group on Sunday evenings. I'm sorry, on Friday evenings, the first Friday of the month. You can join in for that either on Zoom or in person. And then Stacy's also going to be teaching intro workshop, I should say, on the 31st, Saturday, August 31st, 9 to 1, in case you want to catch her then. But before that, I was teaching on samadhi, this unification of the mind. And it's kind of more those talks, so there were probably 4 or 5 of them, more specific about, excuse me, our meditation practice and how through various trainings, techniques, we go from our normal scattered superficial mind to a mind that's more unified. But I'm going back now to this collection of teachings from Ajahn Chah. So we're on chapter 10, I believe, Making the Heart Good. And you can get that. I put it online for those of you who are on Zoom. You can see the document, but those in the room, you could just go to the Sunday morning listing on our calendar and the document is listed there, the link, and you can open it up. And it has some articles related to what I'm talking about each week. And also the link if you want to read the chapter that I'm kind of drawing on. And if you don't know, Ajahn Chah is a great Thai meditation monk and teacher who died in the 90s and quite influential with this early Buddhist tradition that's come here and ends up at Common Ground as an insight meditation center or Vipassana meditation center. But it's really flowing out of places like Burma and Thailand and Sri Lanka, what we're doing here today. And this chapter really has, that title gives it away a little bit, Making the Heart Good. And it's really talking about, in some ways, the work of spiritual life or spiritual practice. And, you may wonder, do I have a spiritual life? And we have a spiritual life as soon as, just in those little corners and brief senses that the pursuit of interesting experience is limited. Doesn't mean we're going to give up on interesting experiences, but we don't imagine that the next interesting experience is really going to do it for us in some lasting or forever sense. And we get interested, like besides the normal ongoing pursuit of navigating our liking and disliking, with experience, what do I do with this human life? And a lot of times when we have that kind of spiritual sense, like, what do I do with this human life? Our first response is often kind of childlike. It's not bad, but it's like, can somebody save me? It's like looking for the grandparent that, well, can somebody take care of me? I really want to be saved. Because that's what we feel like. We want an answer. We want to be held. And you see this in all, including in kind of cultural Buddhism too. It's there. It's in really all of the spiritual traditions, this sort of the divine as some kind of loving parent that's really got our back. And oh, so good. But in, the practice of the Buddhist teachings, the saying is something like, well, the Buddhas have done their work, right? Because it's not just one Buddha, according to the tradition. There have been many over the vastness of time. The Buddhists have done their work, now it's our turn. Right, so what is that work that we are being asked to do? And this current Buddha, the one we know, who lived 2,500 years ago, our teacher, in our early Buddhist tradition, we think of that person as teacher, even though obviously we haven't met them. But somehow their articulation survived all these centuries and imperfect, of course, but still useful for us, functional. Like it makes sense because the level he was talking about, the human heart, is deep enough that it kind of surpasses the influences of culture and time, right? It's like, oh, this is just the underlying nature of the mind that we need to get to know. And our Buddha, our teacher, he described and he said that all Buddhas, all wise people who are compassionately sharing what they've come to understand, they're going to say three things. Abandon what isn't helping, right? Stop hurting yourself and others. Stop doing stuff that sets in motion suffering and stress. Cultivate the good and develop the heart. And by that bhavana is that third one, developing the heart, cultivating the heart, mind, heart, same thing, right? Chitta. So I use them interchangeably, heart and mind, which is good for us because, in the West, we tend to separate them, but it's good to, whatever qualities we associate with the heart, it's good to not separate what we call the mind from those. And whatever clarity and rationality we associate with the mind, it's not good to think the heart doesn't have that kind of clarity, right? So it's really about that integration. But so abandon what isn't helping. Learn how to renounce, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Just the power of renunciation, and to think of it as a positive, creative power. Because we hear these words like sacrifice, and I'm not sure why, but probably lots of influences. We often have a negative or a heavy sense of that. Well, I have to sacrifice. And the Buddha says, well, a wise person would be happy to abandon a lesser happiness. So he's not denying that some of these habits of ours, that we get a little juice from them. I mean, there must be something there that keeps us doing what we do, thinking in the ways we think, talking in the ways we talk, acting in the ways we act. But we're willing to abandon a lesser happiness if there's some clear sense of the possibility of a greater happiness. So some of it is just a failure of spiritual imagination. Like if all we think there are these kind of more ordinary levels of sense pleasure, then we're not going to abandon them in pursuit of something that might be so much more liberating, satisfying, more resonant. I mean, it's really, in some ways, it's just the extension of what anybody transitioning from being a youth to an adult has to learn, right? Like putting aside my short-term interests and developing some long-term interests, like what's going to be for my well-being and hopefully the well-being of others, and what's not in the long term. Just having that bigger perspective. So I just want to make sure that we keep coming back when we hear words like refraining, restraint, sacrifice, to like, oh, I get to practice, I want to practice it. That's how I take care of myself, by not doing what hurts, Stop. Sylvia Boorstein, some of you know, a wonderful teacher from the West Coast and wonderful author as well. One of the founding teachers of Spirit Rock, which is kind of another mothership to this movement here in the West we call Insight Meditation, along with IMS, Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts. She said something just simple: we have to learn to stop scaring ourselves. Just in terms of what we pay attention to and how we pay attention, because it's really easy to do. And the thing is, we get a little rush when we scare ourselves. Maybe they don't love me anymore. We get a little rush. We feel alive in a strange way that comes, of course, with tension. And it isn't that we sort of abandon our logical or rational minds, but we just have to be aware of patterns. And, we're not what we think we are. We're just a bunch of patterns that are impersonal, that have come together due to causes, conditions, right? That's what Mark is. That's what our personalities are. And so, just to have some space. And this is where restraint comes in, when we start to highlight that part, because like I said, we're already have some capacity for refraining, for restraining ourselves. We want to say something to somebody, but we don't. But we want to illuminate it. So it isn't just something semi-conscious, but we want to really feel good about it. I'm so glad I didn't say that. Not saying that, not doing that feels like this. We want to feel the after effect. In Buddhism, the Buddha makes a big deal out of this. The bliss of blamelessness is one of the phrases, the way it gets translated. The happiness of non-remorse. It's like you have a tricky situation at work, whatever it might be, or tricky situation at home with your kids or your parents or whatever it might be. And it could have gone really bad, but it didn't because there was some of this, just to use the word moral here in I think in a useful way, this moral sensitivity, like it matters what I think and say and do. So that heightened awareness, like I want to be aware of the moral implications of what I think and say and do, because I want to take care of myself and I want to take care of everybody. And so that sensitivity, and then we get through it, not perfectly, but having avoided some serious, mistakes that would have had all kinds of painful reverberations. And we should really take the time, like we want to not miss the aftermath that, oh, I'm so happy that I didn't leave a trail of destruction where I could have. How many times do we actually highlight that in our lives? Not that often. I can think of a few, and I've gotten better, over the years, like just really appreciating that. I mean, even after, like I just did in Massachusetts, taught that retreat, a 7-day retreat, because you're kind of in front of the group and people have invested a lot of time and money to be on that retreat, and it's not easy sitting up and trying to represent somebody like the Buddha with a lot of wisdom, right? So, it's kind of an exposed place. And after retreats, it always feels like, oh, not that I did a perfect job, but I didn't blow it. I didn't leak too much, or, because it's easy when you're in front of a crowd, it's easy to sort of get caught up in the energy a little bit. And just to sort of having, oh, that feels good. And another time when it was really strong was when my last parent died. My father was the last to go, and but just that sense, not again that because my mother had Alzheimer's for a long time, like 12 years, and stayed at home. I mean, my dad did, of course, the bulk of the work, and we had to bring people in because she was had very little, couldn't take care of herself for the last couple of years, but there was a sense with both my mom and my dad being gone, just that sense of the bliss of blamelessness. Not that I was a perfect son, but that I did well enough, right? And see, I could scare myself by all the things I didn't do well, but just to have that kind of honest reflection, like, okay, good enough, and to really let that in. Okay, good enough. And what that does is it develops, it sort of reinforces the mind, the heart's willingness to be morally sensitive. Because if all our moral sensitivity is always used to, wag and tell us how we've not lived up to our ideals or society's expectations, well, then we don't want moral sensitivity. We want moral numbness, because I don't want to feel that. So we need to sense, and you know how if you've studied educational psychology, which I have as a grad student a long time ago, the basic principle is you need, like, I forget the exact percentage, but and it's just sort of made up number of statistics. But anyway, you need like 93% success and 7% mistakes. That optimizes learning. Like, so if you think of kids learning their multiplication tables or something like that, when you give them a worksheet, you want them to be almost completely successful, but make a few mistakes, right? Have it hard enough they're making a couple mistakes so that there's a little edginess in it, but mostly they're getting some success. And it's similarly with our, like tonight or today rather, and then maybe next Sunday. Next Sunday, I won't be teaching because we have our annual 9-day Common Ground retreat that Shelley and I are leading with Gabe Keller Flores assisting. Forget if Shelley's teaching next Sunday, maybe. Anyway, when I come back to teach again, I'll probably do one more week on, in Buddhism, we call it sila, which is really this that deep valuing of non-harming. And then how do we operationalize that value so it's just not a spiritual idea, but we're actually doing something about it in our lives, grounding it, operationalizing this value of non-harming. And yeah, and I'll talk about the precepts probably that second Sunday when I come back to this subject if we don't have time for today. So that, like to, it's almost like we want to embody and value that sensitivity. And we won't be able to help ourselves. We'll feel it within, but we'll also feel it without. So there are a lot of shadows here about judging ourselves or judging others. When we have a moral sensitivity, you threw that cup in that bin, but it should have gone in the recyclable bin. It's like moral sensitivity. Don't you care about the earth? Don't you care about the living beings on the planet? So it can go bad, but we're always connecting the sensitivity, the heightened sensitivity, with compassion. Like, how can we take care of ourselves? And we know, like I said a moment ago, that what's valuable is noticing how this moral sensitivity and refraining from thoughts, words, and actions that plant seeds of harm for ourselves and others, it feels good. So we want to highlight that, not just in ourselves, but in others. Like, I really appreciate you did that because it makes me happy. And in Buddhism, it's like an example of dharma. Like a lot of Common Ground, as our leader, our board chair, has been teaching me that we're no longer a small nonprofit, we're a medium-sized nonprofit at our last board meeting. So as a medium-sized nonprofit, spiritual, religious nonprofit, we operate on dana. We don't charge for anything, as most of you know. And we just trust that people coming into relationship with the community, things go out freely, teachings, things come in freely, volunteers and money to pay our staff and have a nice building and our retreat center in Wisconsin. But there's this circle around sila, around moral integrity, moral sensitivity, this beautiful creative power of restraint, just to kind of say it in a more blunt way. It's also a circle of giving and receiving, like we're giving ourselves and each other safety, right? We're receiving the safety and giving safety by this practice. And it's not so much that I'm trying to restrain myself from doing what I really want to do because it's bad. It's like we trust the sensitivity to lead to the letting go or to the restraining. Not so much that I'm going to stop myself, but the mind's discernment of where that leads stops the mind from thinking that thought, saying those words, acting in that way. And that's what we really want to trust, that natural process, that the heart, which is this very alive, changing thing, it isn't a static you, me back there. It's activity. And what we're developing is this discernment, this moral discernment. And that's what puts the brakes on actions that aren't helpful. And it's like, it's so good to see that in operation. Like, we might see the more childish part of our conditioning just wants to grab something that's not really ours, or take more than our share, or whatever it might be. Like one of the things I've been watching a lot in myself is, it's the occupational hazard rather of being a teacher. It's just like wanting to talk when I'm in a group of people. And I just like observing, like, yeah, I could say something. But what's so interesting is like that moral sensitivity. No, this is subtle stuff. And I'm not judging myself. I'm just curious about like peeling back the onion and seeing that underneath that impulse to say something is a kind of a more tender neediness, whatever that is, that neediness to be seen, the neediness to, whatever, be in the center of things or whatever it might be. But it needs to be, I want to see that because I care. Because I can't really, like, whatever that, let's call it neurotic way that it's trying to take care of itself, there may be a better way to take care of that uneasy part of my heart that's needy. Like feeling it and saying, and actually feeling, I care about you, you know, and honey, you don't need to be afraid. Or do you need to be afraid? I mean, you can really get in there with those things that drive so many of our less than skillful thoughts, less than skillful words, less than skillful actions. And there's no end. Like one of the misunderstandings in this world of sila, not perfectly, but could be translated as ethical conduct, is we think of it a lot as a minimum standard. Like if I meet this standard, then I'm good. And always judging, like, but it's not, there's no end to this. And we don't want there to be an end, because if we do what I've been talking about, we start to sense a lot of happiness. This is a very available happiness for a lot of us. Like if you just want to, in Western psychological terms, we might call it self-esteem. But it's much richer than, when we think of self-esteem, but it's like, it really is uplifting in our lives, this sense of moral integrity, that somehow this mind, heart, whatever, it knows how to take care of itself as it navigates all the sticky stuff that comes with being a human being in relationship with all the things we're in relationship with, all the people, communities, this messy world of ours. And that's that circle of giving and receiving that, but it's really on that level of safety. And you can start to sense it with people who have just naturally developed and value this moral sensitivity. You feel safe when you're around these people that and and you don't feel safe when you're around other folks. An example, some of our relatives, I have a very big family. Both my parents came from families that were very big, Catholic families, and we would hang out with our cousins a lot growing up, and it was mostly just great. But but I have to say that sometimes, when my parents dropped me off at one of my cousin's farms, and there's lots of different examples, but you know, I didn't feel so safe. And it was really, when I look back on it, it was really this moral sensitivity. Like they had different frames than I did about how to think, speak, and act. And I remember that very clearly, especially like seventh and eighth grade, just as it was kind of getting clearer in my mind. This like, it's not like I asked for it, but just partly because of my upbringing or whatever, and just sort of noticing what boys do in those years, and just feeling like the tension of that, like, what am I going to follow? am I going to do what the crowd is doing, or am I going to listen to this? And it was just very interesting to have that. And a lot of times, we may not trust it. So I'm hoping that with this talk that we'll just start looking for that moral sensitivity. And it's usually around something the mind is inclined to think or do or say. But there's something arises, and it arises from our past learning. Right? Where else could it come from? This sort of hesitation. Right? It isn't coming from outside. It's sort of the essence of all of the mistakes and all the learnings from our mistakes and that we've observed, the mind has observed, right? And it comes up and it doesn't say anything directly. It doesn't say, don't do that. But it's this felt sense or moral sensitivity. You could call it intuition. But we have to be willing to listen, because it's a quieter voice than the strong impulse to just do what the mind, whatever that strong impulse might be. It's almost like we have to learn to ask, well, what else is here? What else is the heart sensing here? Any moral danger? You can kind of make it lighter so it doesn't, how does, how is the past, how can the past inform what's happening, what I'm feeling right now? The Buddha said that to try to be a wise and loving person, to develop a spiritual life without getting interested in this more earthy end of our spiritual practice is like trying to dye a cloth that's really dirty. It doesn't work well. And he wrote in that chapter 10 that I mentioned, making the heart good. This is how people are. You have to look closely, look at yourselves. The Buddha taught about having recollection and self-awareness in all situations. Wrongdoing arises in bodily, verbal, and mental actions. The source of all good, evil, well-being, and harm lies with actions, speech, and thoughts. Did you bring your actions, speech, and thoughts with you today? Or have you left them at home? This is where you must look. Right here. You don't have to look very far away. Look at your actions, speech, and thoughts. Look to see if your conduct is faulty or not. It's just interesting how that can seem like a burden, but this is like the path, the Eightfold Path. It's really about bringing awareness, that wisdom and awareness, to all frequencies of our life. So this relational part of life, you could say, is the grossest frequency. It's the most obvious part of our lives. But it's as important, especially in the West, maybe, there's kind of a fascination with bringing awareness to the most subtle aspects of the mind. And we like that, the subtlety of a concentrated mind. But the Buddhist teachings are about these three places. We bring our wholehearted interest to this area of moral sensitivity, all the ways we're relating, all the ways we earn our livelihood or find our way through life, or have sexual relations, or deal with power things in our communities, right? That's just as important as sitting meditation. And then the middle part is the samadhi that I talked about the previous 5 weeks. It's really like taking care of the ecology of our heart and mind, like how's the mind doing? And that we often do in a more meditative setting, although we can do that all day long. And then the most subtle part of the path is really the wisdom end of things is like one's underlying view. And that more subtle work is really supported. We get, instructions like, oh, it's just nature, not self, not personal. But, that's just philosophy until things settle down and the mind is capable of being subtle and really seeing the truth of those wisdom teachings. So a lot of the wisdom end of things is more we get handed some, well, this is what came to be known by me in my practice, like the Buddha's talking to us. So we hold it as, okay, well, we'll see. And we do the practice. But we see real results in these two areas. Like when you bring awareness to your relational world and cultivate this moral sensitivity and start and really key in and start to appreciate the happiness of non-remorse. Really let that feed, that create a feedback system. Things will start changing in your lives. Even if you have a pretty graceful, ethical life already, there's probably all kinds of ways, like even how you treat your own body. I always bring up like how in some really simple activities like brushing our teeth, there can be a little rushing, a little aggression, damn teeth. And it's like, oh, that just that deep sensitivity around non-harming starts to come alive. And it's a source of happiness, not a heavy weight. Or how we interact with people that push our buttons a little bit or want to talk a lot. And I just noticed that if I'm not aware, I'll be a little bit afraid of like getting trapped in a conversation. And like, what sort of seeds is that planting in my heart and in the world? And are those the seeds I want to be planting? Is there another way to take care of myself that doesn't plant heavy seeds of tension? And that's the creative part. Like we just assume fear is the appropriate response, or getting tight or whatever is the appropriate response. But we haven't actually brought our whole heart to that. Ajahn gives the example in the chapter, if you read it. It's like washing dishes with a scowl on our face. It's like we're doing our job, but what other seeds are we planting? Like if you're going to wash the dishes, we might as well be all in and happy. Like, oh, someone's got to wash the dishes. I'm the one washing the dishes. It would be really nice that the dishes are washed. And if, we're not sharing the duties properly, well, then maybe we should have a conversation. But right now, I'm either going to wash the dishes or not. But to wash the dishes with a scowl, who is that helping? The scowl part of it. But somehow we feel, when we're not being aware, we just feel, well, it's appropriate, dragging my feet. Another way to highlight this area of sila is just to bring to mind, it's like a reflection. I mean, the general reflection is, where in my life do I tend not to be naturally morally sensitive? Like where here I don't have to be, Or another way to think of that is, what do you do when you're alone that you wouldn't do if a respected friend was there with you? Because you'd be embarrassed by it. And just to get it, instead of like that being a cause for shame, oh God, can't believe I do that, just to get interested in that. Like tell yourself, okay, it's okay to do that, but we're going to be aware. We're going to bring that full, whole sensitivity, right? Because it arrives, that sensitivity, the motivation for being wisely aware is that we want to take care of this life and we don't want to set in motion reverberations of unnecessary suffering around us, right? Most of us can tap into that basic self-compassion. So I'm not telling you, Mark, what you should or shouldn't do. I just want to be there with you, this moral sensitivity. I just want to be there with you so that it can be sensed what's getting set in motion and whether that's helpful or not. Onward, in Buddhism, we might say onward leading in the direction of happiness and release, the release of what's extra, what's heavy in our heart. And it's just an interesting place when, we're at that fork in the road and, and we get interested. It's just easy for that reflection to turn into more parental judging, right? So we have to reform how the mind is sort of relating to itself. It's exactly what we do with children, whether you're a parent, but I was an educator for a while, and instead of telling them they're bad, we just try to help young people understand that when you do this and then that, it sets in motion this, there will be these consequences. If you do this other thing, then this is generally how things unfold, and there will be these different consequences. So we're really helping ourselves read cause and effect, but not just in the short term, but having a vaster sense of, what kind of person am I setting in motion? What kind of heart or mind am I setting in motion? Do I want to inhabit, feel that heart and mind that I'm setting in motion? And what we need is a little bit of confidence or faith that we can set in motion a really beautiful heart and mind. And that's a good place to end. Different people have different conditioning around this. Having been raised as a Catholic in that system and had a relatively good experience through my very early teens, and then sort of drifted. But I got this infusion very early on that, like I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, that there's something really good, something really beautiful and good. And we need that in our imagination to some degree, because as a counterweight to now this is just specific to some of you, anybody who has the opposite fixed view that there isn't good. So it isn't so much that we need that idea that there's good, but we definitely it's not helpful to have the idea that there's not good, that nothing matters. It's just not, in a functional way, a good view to base our life on. Like what that sets in motion in terms of moral sensitivity and all kinds of other ways. In Buddhism, they talk about people who have cultivated this beautiful moral sensitivity as having a scent that is unmistakable and goes everywhere, like far away. Oh, I'm in the vicinity of somebody with real moral integrity. And you just look around in your relations and just you'll sense that that's a kind of beauty, just like physical beauty is a kind of beauty. And people who have an organized mind is a kind of beauty. I mean, there are different kinds of beauties, but one beauty is somebody who's living a life with moral integrity. But it's not a tight thing, it's a natural thing. That's the key. It's like in a lot of times in the West, the reason I hesitate using words like moral and ethical is that we have this top down, like somebody is telling us what's right and wrong. In Buddhism, it's really arises, moral integrity arises from our own sensitivity, observing cause and effect, basically, what's getting set in motion. And that's why ultimately it's really trustworthy. But it all arises out of sensitivity. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. Nice to be with you today.